True crime didn't always mean entertainment. When Lady Killers was made, television treated the reconstruction of real murder as a civic responsibility, not a spectacle, not a puzzle, and not a form of leisure. There is no promise of insight into a killer's mind here, no teasing suspense, no emotional manipulation. What matters instead is testimony, procedure, and the quiet pressure of institutions deciding whose stories count. That difference between then and now shapes everything this series does. Lady Killers belongs to a period when television still believed that revisiting real crimes served a public purpose. These reconstructions aren't designed to thrill or disturb. They are deliberately restrained, legally grounded, and emotionally sober. Violence is present, but it is never lingered on. What takes precedence is process: who speaks, who is heard, and how authority frames events after the fact. This places the series at a crucial moment in the history of true crime television, just before the genre hardened into entertainment. Modern true crime is built around access to the crime, to the psychology, to private suffering. It promises understanding through intimacy. Lady Killers offers none of that. It keeps its distance. The camera does not identify with perpetrators, and it does not invite the viewer into their inner lives. Motivation is not excavated. Psychology is not speculated upon. The killer is not the subject. Instead, the series is concerned with systems. Each episode unfolds as a reconstruction, shaped by evidence and testimony. Statements are weighed, contradictions are allowed to sit unresolved. Authority figures, the police, the courts, and the institutions are present, but they are not dramatized as heroes. Their role is procedural, sometimes hesitant, sometimes flawed. The emphasis is not on revelation, but on accumulation, how a version of events slowly takes shape, and how fragile that version often is. This is why Lady Killers feels so alien now. Contemporary true crime is narrative first. It knows where it's going. Even when it pretends to ask questions, it is moving steadily toward closure. Lady Killers does not guarantee closure. Its reconstructions acknowledge uncertainty, gaps in knowledge, and the limits of what can be proven or known. The program trusts the viewer to sit with that discomfort. And crucially, it trusts the material enough not to embellish it. The visual language of the series reinforces this restraint. Reconstructions are functional rather than expressive. There is little in the way of stylization, no attempt to aestheticize violence. Scenes are staged plainly, often at a remove. The camera observes rather than intrudes. Music, where it appears at all, is minimal and non-directive. Nothing here is designed to provoke fascination. This matters because it reflects a different understanding of television's role. Lady Killers assumes that broadcasting real crimes carries an ethical burden. The program behaves as though an act of reconstruction itself requires justification, that it must earn its presence on screen by offering insight into social structures, not just recounting harm. That assumption has largely disappeared. As true crime evolved, reconstruction became spectacle. Techniques designed to hold attention, cliffhangers, emotional hooks, and narrative teasing became standard. Violence moved closer to the viewer. The killer's perspective became central. Explanation replaced examination. Responsibility gave way to consumption. Lady Killers sits just before that shift becomes irreversible. What's striking is how much the series is concerned with women, not as symbols, but as social subjects. The title might suggest sensationalism, but the programs themselves resist it. These are not stories about monstrosity. They are stories about constraint, domestic pressure, limited agency, social expectation, and institutional response. The crimes are inseparable from the conditions in which they occur. Rather than isolating individual acts, the series repeatedly widens the frame. Family structures, economic dependence, community surveillance, and legal limitation all exert pressure. Responsibility is diffused across environments rather than concentrated in a single psyche. This is not a drama of evil, it is a study of consequence. And again, that places the series firmly outside modern genre expectations. Today, true crime often narrows its focus. It privileges intensity over context. Lady Killers does the opposite. It is slow where modern television is urgent. It is careful where contemporary programs are assertive. It does not rush to interpretation. The slowness is not a failure of drama, it is the drama. The tension in Lady Killers comes from procedure, not danger, from waiting, not pursuit, from watching institutions attempt, sometimes inadequately, to process events that resist clean explanation. In this sense, the series shares more DNA with documentary and public inquiry than with crime drama. It treats murder not as narrative fuel, but as a social rupture that must be examined cautiously. That caution extends to the viewer's position. The series does not flatter its audience. It does not offer mastery or the illusion of superior understanding. It does not invite judgment or moral certainty. Instead, it asks the viewer to observe how stories are assembled and to notice what is lost in that assembly, whose voice is emphasized, whose is marginalized, which details are formalized, and which are quietly set aside. This is where Lady Killers reveals its deeper concern. It is less interested in crime than in authority, in how institutions decide what counts as truth, in how gender shapes credibility, in how order is restored, not through justice, but through process. Seen this way, the series is not a precursor to modern true crime, so much as a path not taken. Television could have continued in this direction, treating reconstruction as a form of civic examination rather than entertainment. Instead, the genre pivoted towards immediacy, emotional access, and narrative satisfaction. The costs of that pivot are now obvious: saturation, sensationalism, and a blurring of ethical boundaries. Lady Killers reminds us that another model once existed, not because it was perfect, but because it was careful, because it assumed limits, because it believed that revisiting real suffering demanded restraint rather than amplification. And that belief, now largely abandoned, is what makes the series worth revisiting today. Not as nostalgia, but as evidence that television once understood true crime as something that required responsibility before it could become content. Thanks very much for listening. I do hope you've enjoyed that, and I do appreciate you listening, especially if you've got to the end. But I'll be back with another TV show another time. Bye.